All attendees are in listen-only mode.
I would like to thank you for joining us for today's presentation on rural sourcing, the programs and incentives that matter. Today's webinar is the third installment of a four-part webinar series on low-cost domestic sourcing sponsored by the USDA Rural Development Office. Before we get started, I wanted to review a few housekeeping items and let you know how you can participate in today's web event. During the presentation, you will have the ability to send questions through the question box found on the webinar panel on the right-hand side of your screen. The speakers will address your questions during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Also, to let everyone know, today's webinar is being recorded, and everyone will receive an email with a link to view a recording of today's event. Our speakers for today are Doug O'Brien, the Deputy Undersecretary for USDA Rural Development, Tony Kaai, President of Denison Development Alliance, and Dr. Patty Poole, former Executive Director of Center for Workplace Learning at Grayson County College. I'll start off with their bios. Mr. Doug O'Brien was appointed Deputy Undersecretary for USDA Rural Development on August 1st, 2011. Prior to his appointment, Mr. O'Brien served as Senior Advisor to Secretary Tom Vilsack and Chief of Staff to Deputy Secretary Kathleen Merrigan. Before joining USDA, Mr. O'Brien held positions as Assistant Director at the Ohio Department of Agriculture, Senior Advisor to Iowa Governor Chet Culver, Interim Co-Director for the National Agricultural Law Center in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and Senior Staff Attorney at the Drake Agricultural Law Center in Des Moines, Iowa. He is former counsel for the U.S. Senate Agricultural Committee, where he worked on the 2002 Farm Bill, livestock marketing, agricultural credit, and cooperative issues. In addition, Mr. O'Brien served as the legislative assistant for Representative Leonard Boswell and as clerk for Chief Justice Jerry Larson of the Iowa Supreme Court. Mr. O'Brien graduated from Loras College and earned a Juris Doctorate with honors from the University of Iowa. He holds a master's degree in agricultural law from the University of Arkansas. Our next speaker is going to be Tony Kaai. Tony has served as president of the Denison Development Alliance and the Denison Industrial Foundation since June 1st of 2000. Since his arrival, he has assisted with the expansion and relocation of 24 companies that have created over 2,300 new jobs. In 2006, Tony was selected to serve on the board of directors of the Texas Economic Development Council. Tony came to Denison from Muskogee, Oklahoma, where during his 8-year tenure as president of the Muskogee Development, he played a significant role in the expansion and relocation of 18 companies that created over 2,000 new jobs. Prior to his tenure at the Muskogee, he served as president of the Cushing Chamber of Commerce and Industry. In 1994, Tony achieved his industry's highest honors by becoming a certified economic developer. In 1995, he was selected by the Oklahoma Economic Development Council as the Professional of the Year. He served as president of the OEDC, the statewide economic development organization, in 1998. Tony now serves on the North Texas Regional Airport Development Committee, the Texoma Council of Governments Economic Development Policy Advisory Committee, the Texoma Health Foundation, and on the board of directors for the Center for Workplace Learning. Tony is a graduate of Oklahoma State University. Our final speaker is Dr. Patty Poole, who was the executive director for the Center for Workplace Learning at Grayson County College in Denison, Texas, where she oversaw the Employer Training Solutions Workforce Development Grants and Open Enrollment Continuing Education. Her results-oriented leadership helped to drive growth of that division by over 200%, much of which came through the Texas Workforce Commission and local workforce board grant opportunities. Her prior experience includes Professor of Marketing and Leadership at a regional university, Director of Marketing for a nonprofit regional medical center, and telecommunications consultant. She helped establish the industrial maintenance program at Grayson to train entry-level students for the local workforce. Dr. Poole is currently Vice President of Sales for Boston Reed and works with colleges and universities in the South Central United States. She has a PhD in Training and Development and an MBA with a marketing focus, and is also a published author with articles on such topics as improving the performance of a sales team, e-commerce strategies for small and medium-sized businesses, and the effectiveness of distance learning. And with that, I will start off with Doug O'Brien, who's going to kick off the presentations today. I turn it over to you, Doug.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you for the opportunity to spend some time with the group today. It's a very important topic for us here at the United States Department of Agriculture, and in particular in the Rural Development Mission area that I get to work with. The slides that I have presented and that you'll see today are really more designed for sort of leave behind. They are pretty rich with information, so I'm going to tick through them pretty quickly and certainly not cover every word or topic that's on the slides. But I do want to. There's a lot of good information I want to make sure that the participants have access to today. The first thing I'd like to talk about, next slide, is the setting some context here. Just a little over a week ago, President Obama talked about the importance of creating an economy built to last, and in the position that the United States finds itself in, which is actually it's a very good position. But we do need to focus our energies, focus our investments to make sure that we take the greatest advantage possible of the opportunity. A few things that the President talked about was, in particular, advanced manufacturing, and as well as workforce training, domestic energy, and how all of those things tied together really do provide a great platform for economies built to last in America. And really, I don't think there's a better set of priorities for rural communities, communities that I get to focus on and work with on a day-to-day basis because of the strong history of manufacturing and the great workforce that we have in rural places. Next slide. I'd like to talk just on this slide just a little bit about who USDA Rural Development is. Hopefully most of the folks on the call are familiar with our mission area, but I'll just take 1 minute. USDA Rural Development is one of the 7 mission areas in the United States Department of Agriculture. We have a mission of increasing economic opportunities and improving the quality of life in rural places. We have a comprehensive set of programs I'll talk about in a little bit. We have a significant footprint. To meet our mission, Congress and in the administrations over the years have determined that we need to physically be with the people in rural areas because of the unique needs that those communities and that those businesses have. So we continue to have about 500 offices throughout the country. We have 47 state offices in essentially every state, and we like to think that we are a very accessible sort of open door for people in rural communities and rural businesses into the federal government, which brings me to talk about the federal partnerships. We work very closely with the Small Business Administration, with the Economic Development Administration on the complementary programs that each of these federal agencies have. So in particular, in the last few years, we're closely with SBA to ensure that if somebody comes to us, that is the USDA, with a project that we're not able to fund, but we know that SBA might be able to fund, we make sure to do that handoff to make sure that that rural constituent, that rural business, gets to talk to the right person for that opportunity. Next slide, please. Now, a little bit more about rural development. An easy way to describe how we're organized and really give you a sense of what we do. We have 3 component agencies. The first is the Rural Utility Service. The second is the Rural Business Service, and the third at the top there is the Rural Housing Service. So as their names clearly indicate, the utility service, we do water and wastewater systems. We do telecommunications, which historically had been phone systems, but now is broadband almost exclusively. And then we have electric generation and distribution, in particular with the electric co-ops throughout the country. The Rural Business Service, we have some programs that look quite a bit like some of the Small Business Administration programs, but actually are somewhat distinct. The flagship program there is the Business and Industry Loan Program, where we're able to work with the bank to guarantee loans, generally 80%, sometimes up to 90%, for a business to build, expand, and at the end of the day, create jobs. We also have a special mission for cooperatives, that special type of business entity found throughout the country and certainly in rural places. And we work very closely with a number of cooperative centers and directly with the cooperative businesses themselves. The Rural Housing Service, we provide financing, both direct and guaranteed loans for single-family housing as well as multifamily housing, and then community facilities. So eligible entities include municipalities and nonprofits to build essential community facilities, which broadly drawn really includes everything from helping finance a school or a hospital all the way down to helping buy computers for the school and a lot of public safety projects in between, ambulances and fire trucks, etc. So those are our three programs. I should take just one moment to talk about what do we mean by rural, and their definitions provided us by Congress in law, and I'll stay out of the weeds on it, but to make it easy, for our business programs, it's essentially places, firms that are in places of 50,000 people or less are eligible. And then our utility and housing programs, some of the programs are 20,000 and under, and actually some of the water programs in particular are 10,000 people and under. The next slide is actually a listing of all the different types of loans, and you can go to the next slide, Matthew, that the three different agencies have. I won't go through them. You can read through them and see that it indicates that the water and the telecom. We have a number of specific renewable energy programs. The one that it had fairly robust funding. There were a number of programs that had fairly robust funding in the last 3 or 4 years. That some of that funding is winding down, but we will continue to have some energy programs that help smaller scale projects, both on renewable energy and energy efficiency, and then the listing of housing programs. We can go to the next slide. I do want to highlight two particular programs that I think this audience might be interested in, programs designed for rural businesses to create jobs, to grow, and to expand. The first one is called the Rural Economic Development Loan and Grant Program. This program is provided by the rural electric or telecommunications borrowers. So typically that's a rural electric cooperative in a rural place, or the rural telephone company in a rural community. Basically, we provide them resources. That is, the USDA provides the co-op the resources to provide business loans with very favorable interest rates, as well as some grant dollars. So that's, if you have a rural cooperative, a rural telephone or electric cooperative in your area, this is something that you certainly want to look into, have a conversation with them, and have a conversation with our rural development staff. The contact for our rural development folks is on the last slide when we get to it. The next program there is the Business and Industry Guaranteed Loan Program, which I talked about a little bit, and that's really a pretty straightforward guarantee program for-profit businesses. USDA works with generally local banks or local farm credit institutions to guarantee loans, so that those financial institutions are willing to take that risk to create jobs in their local areas. It's a great partnership that the federal government is able to do with the private entity in the rural community. Next slide, Matthew, please. Winding up, this is just an example of some things, a particular example of things that we've been up to. Our Undersecretary Dallas Tonsager spent a week in Oregon last week announcing a number of major loans and grants. One, a $232.5 million loan to Zeachem Biorefinery through our Biorefinery Assistance Program, creating a number of good jobs, sustainable jobs that will last into the future. He also announced a number of value-added producer grants, a program I haven't talked about yet today that is designed for farmers or producers of commodities who want to take that commodity and further process it in some way to add value, so that the farmer can reap some of those dollars that in the past had traditionally gone to a middleman. So those are just two specific and timely examples. And the last slide, page 8, Matthew, just wanted to provide you some of our contact information. I'll talk particularly about USDA. And if there's a takeaway at all that I want to provide you. It's that if you're not familiar with your local rural development office, please reach out to those folks. Again, we have almost 500 offices throughout the country. There's a state office in essentially every state, and we're here to assist rural businesses and rural communities thrive and improve the quality of life in rural places. And you can find all that contact information in the links provided on this last slide. So I will stop there, and again, I look forward to question and answer, and thank you for the opportunity to spend time with you today.
Thank you, Doug. As a reminder, questions can be asked in the panel on your right, on your screen. We will now transition to Tony.
Hello, everyone, and greetings from Denison, Texas. It's very much an honor to be on here with the panel to talk about locating outsourcing jobs in rural communities. First of all, I wanted to introduce you to the city that I work in, Denison, Texas. We're a community of 22,000. We're a sister city with Sherman, Texas, about 37,000, so that gives us about 120,000 people in our area. Denison is, I guess, somewhat famous. Thullenberger is from Denison, Texas, and so is Dwight D. Eisenhower. We're a regional hub for jobs and shopping in this part of Texas. Our labor force is about 58,000 people. I think we're asked to be on this panel because we've had a lot of experience and success in back office jobs, and specifically the 3 companies that are in Denison today, and 2 of them have been here for 30-plus years, are Trailblazer Healthcare Services. They employ 520. Cigna, the insurance company, 1,100 people. And then recently we recruited a company, Noble One, who is a contact center. So we have some experience in this, and I've been in the business for 28 years and have dealt a lot with back office projects, and they're very exciting and extremely beneficial to the local community. Next slide. I think my job really is to talk about incentives, but before I talk about incentives in regard to cash or tax abatement, I think it's important from the community standpoint for those out there that work in the communities and try to recruit jobs that, first of all, the community needs to be organized. So they need to have a strategic plan. Through that plan, you're going to bring your local leadership together. They're going to understand the benefit of back office jobs or call centers. That's the very first step that each community that's interested in being successful should undertake. You have to have a strategic plan, and in that plan, you've got to target these back office opportunities. Through that work, obviously, you need a professional ED organization in most communities. Even rural communities do have economic development organizations in one form or another. Some of the smaller communities still rely on their Chamber of Commerce to be the lead. Others have professional economic development organizations with full-time staff that do nothing but economic development, and that's the way we're set up in Denison, Texas. It's important that through the economic development organization that leadership and the staff understand the needs of back office prospects or clients. It's a little bit different than what we typically grew up doing, and that's manufacturing recruitment. If the community understands the need of the client, then they're going to be prepared to make the project happen. To that end, just some examples of being prepared. We targeted back office many years ago, and we started developing the assets for that target. Number one is labor, and that is always number one. I'm trying to recruit a back office center. What is the labor availability? Where does it come from? What are the turnover rates? What is the price of that labor? You have to know that information. It's fairly easy to get. Secondly, in our case, probably one of the most beneficial incentives that we have past being organized is real estate. So we'll go to the next slide. We're going to talk a little bit about real estate as an incentive. When you're dealing with prospects, you want to be prepared. And for back office, I don't think anything is more important than having available real estate that is ready to go if possible. other than the real estate as a piece of infrastructure, of course, you have to have the basics, the telecom services, and most people have those in rural communities today. I hope they do. When it comes to real estate, when we're dealing with prospects, obviously the price of real estate is critical, but more than that, it's the speed of development. It seems like every project that we work on today in today's environment, everyone is in a hurry. And if you're not able to meet and develop at the speed of business, you're going to be eliminated from the site search, and some other community that is prepared is going to win. So speed to development. How do you get there? I know in our case, what has been successful for us is to actually buy real estate, and we'll go to the next slide. We have a couple of examples here. This is a medical office building that is currently vacant but could be converted. We don't own this real estate, but we know more about this piece of real estate than the owner knows about it. And you have to know that in order to put together the proposal for the prospect as far as pricing and the infrastructure and everything that's involved, the redevelopment of that space, what is the timing to have that space ready to be occupied. All of those factors are critical, and you have to be able to get that information immediately when meeting with a prospect. The other slide is an example of what we did as a community. And we purchased an existing vacant Walmart building back in 1998, specifically for the purpose of bringing a call center to Denison. We built out 30,000 square feet, and we've had numerous call centers in this space. But back to the point of pricing, because it is a public entity that owns this space, we're not in it to make a profit. We're in it to create jobs and get the secondary benefits from those jobs. So we're able to price this at a price point that a private developer would not do or wouldn't be able to do. So kind of an example on pricing, because I think that is a real critical key incentive for any company that you may be working with, or in the company. From the company's perspective, the price of real estate in some rural markets. In this case, in our center, totally built out with all the furniture, cubicles, backup generator, UPS, fully operational. We were able to get this company in there for around $10 a square foot. That's triple net, so very cost effective. The other building that I mentioned, the Morrison office building, to get a complete build out, fully operational, probably in total gross lease on that would be about $16 a square foot. So again, in my opinion, if you're going to do anything, find some space and spend some time to develop it and be ready to move to get it developed and operational for any back office company that you might be dealing with. And the next step is the incentive, which is what this teleconference's webinar is all about, is how do you develop the incentives and what incentives are there from local communities. Well, in the case of a lot of Texas cities, we have our own sales tax allocated to economic development. And we offer cash, we also offer tax abatements, and we also have grants available for training, and Dr. Poole is going to cover that, so I won't get into that. But as a community representative, when you're dealing with a company, to design those benefits and put a package together for the prospect, there's a couple of things involved. One, who is the company and what is their reputation? Some companies are obviously more valuable for your community than maybe others that may be just getting started in the business. We always get the wages, the investment, and the benefits. And we use a software, and I think most professionals will do this, to run an economic impact statement. And that impact statement will say, we'll give you the numbers on, well, what's the return on your investment in your community based on these wages, investments, and benefits. We try to get a 3-year return on our investment when we structure our incentives. As a rule of thumb for cash incentives in Texas, we've seen anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000 per job created in some of the rural communities when dealing with back office companies. From an economic development perspective, and I guess from a company perspective as well, there is a player that everyone has to understand, and that is that there will be probably a brokerage firm involved in the transaction. And that really helps the process, I think, from being involved in this for many years. Those consultants are really good at mediating and negotiating the incentives so that at the end of the day, both the company and the city come out in a win-win situation. I mean, there are occasions when they may try to be a little overbearing and try to get a little more out of the community than really what it's worth, but I mean, that's our responsibility as economic developers to make sure it's a balanced approach and that we give those benefits that are relative to the wages and investments and the benefits. So I guess in summary on the incentives, from a local perspective, every city, every state, they're all different. But on the next slide, just wanted to summarize those incentives again. Cash, we do low interest financing. On the call center that I mentioned that we own, we actually financed about $500,000 of that equipment that went in that center. On tax abatements, we also offer that through our taxing entities. And then again, the key thing I think is a low-cost real estate. In the state of Texas, there are additional incentives that can be brought to bear with a prospect. The State Enterprise Fund is a program through the state of Texas that will also provide cash grants for new jobs created, and it's exactly the way we do it. It's all related to the name of the company, their history, the wages and the benefits and the investment they're going to make. So we also have the Skills Development Fund, which Dr. Poole will talk about. Extremely important. That is a program that allows us to do specific training for any industry that comes into our area. I didn't cover a lot on the federal programs, but we've already heard that earlier in this presentation, so that should get everyone up to date on that. So in summary, I think it benefits both the company and the city if the city leadership has the assets in place to close a deal, and if they're educated and understand back office type businesses. I recommend that you have existing real estate. You either own it or you know more about it than the owner of the real estate, and you know what it takes cost-wise to develop it and how long it takes to get that property usable by the client. You need to have all your labor data ready and a system in place that can provide industry-specific training. And then finally, really understand the role of incentives. Incentives are there to close the deal. If the deal is totally dependent on incentives to come to your community, it's probably not a good deal. You want to try to get a win-win situation so the company gets some support, but then the community sees a return on their investment in a relatively short period of time. That's what I've got. Thanks.
Thanks, Tony. And our third speaker is going to be Dr. Patty Poole, who will give us a discussion on workforce.
Thank you, Matthew. I'm pleased to be here to represent community colleges across the country and to share with you that we have a lot to offer. And there we go. The Center for Workplace Learning is one example of the collaboration of our local economic development community, our workforce board, and the college. And the center is, it's been established for almost 8 years now, but the concept was 8 years ago. The actual facility is about 7 years old now, but the community went together and positioned this effort so that companies across the region that were served by the community college could benefit from having a facility to work in. And it is part of the college. There are community education courses going on there, as well as the industry classes, but it's been a fabulous opportunity to really utilize taxpayer dollars, investment through economic development, and grants available through the local workforce board. I've seen other colleges now that are doing something similar to the Walmart example that Tony Kaai just mentioned, where they're moving into old grocery stores, revitalizing spaces, and converting them into their workforce centers in collaboration with the college and the community. So that's happening across the country, and really good things are coming from it. The purpose of ours is, of course, to advance continuing education. And when the center began, and it continues to be a resource for what we would really consider world-class training on the local level. A lot of companies want the best, but it's difficult to send people away. And when you have a cooperation with your community college, it's really easy to work together to provide those classes locally. And I'll speak a little more about that in just a minute. There's a couple of things we see in continuing education. One is referred to as open enrollment classes, and those programs are set up for anyone to come through. And then the customized training is determined by the client as to how much customization is going to be there. Our community college is probably one of the best kept secrets in your county and in your community, because a lot of companies do not realize they can get customized training so close to home. And customization can be something, probably one of the most effective ways is just when the class is delivered and where it's delivered, and the value of that within your community, because you can have, we all know that a learning experience is going to be enriched if it can be taken in like a small bite at a time. And it also helps to work with your production schedules, your workforce opportunities there, when you can offer a class for 2 hours at a time, 4 hours, and so forth, as opposed to having to send someone off for a full day. And there's probably not anyone on this webinar that hasn't been to one of those, and about 2 o'clock in the afternoon you cannot absorb one more thing. But yet that's the way we often do it. But your community college can make those classes so much richer and manageable for your work schedule. So whether you participate in something that's an open enrollment that's just out there in the schedule and you can send people through, or customize it, don't forget the community college on that level. When we look at partnering, we do have that best kept secret, and the specific needs for the business can be adapted through the staff at your workforce center in the continuing education division. And even to the point that those programs that are developed specifically for your business, in many cases, can lead to certifications that will be transferable, or what we talk about today as stackable credentialing, where where your students can gain knowledge in the continuing education arena and be able to transfer that either to other businesses if they do move, or other parts of the area or country where they're training. Now, why is that important to you as economic development partners? Well, that's just the opportunity to really make sure that you are developing that workforce, and that you're educating them, and that your community college is a willing partner in taking care of that for you. Some of you may be familiar with MSSC, which is a Manufacturing Standard Skills Council, and those types of programs, whether it's NIMS or other things in the more technical areas, are offered at many community colleges. And if they're not, then you can be a party to making sure that they are offered in the future. The classes are delivered when you need them, and then something that we often forget about is that all that space at the community college, it's not utilized 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so oftentimes when you're looking for a place to do some hiring events, your own training, or customized training through the college, or even meetings. You can do that at your community college at a very reasonable price. A lot of times, especially with a new business, you have a need to bring people together to talk about the insurance, enrollments, and that sort of thing. And it's difficult to have a space at the place of business, especially if you're running more than one shift, to house all those people where they can hear it. But if you look to your community college for an auditorium or space that would work for that, then it really is great. And it's an opportunity to bring everyone together. Probably one of the most important functions for you, or what you're looking for out of this too, is the grant funding opportunities. And those, your community college is often the place to access those funds. I show you this slide just as an example of what a small college can do. Grayson County College is considered a small size medium college, just slightly larger than a small community college. And actually, we have averaged there almost $1 million a year in training funds through the Texas Workforce Commission, the State Comptroller's Office, and the local workforce board. And those dollars make a big difference, especially when you consider that over 6,000 people have been trained in that short time with those funds in a relatively small, rural area. We don't think of ourselves so much as rural, but we are, 100,000 in the county. So that's not a lot of people, but it's incredible the difference it will make for those businesses. So the typical cost to a business that's looking at partnering for those grant funds, most agencies or groups are going to look for something at least the in-kind wages for your employees as they train. There are places that will ask for up to 25% of the project budget, but those are the sort of things that you would expect to be investing in. So can you train new employees? Yes. And will you be expected to pay them while they're in training? Yes. And the reason I say yes on that, although in some cases it may not be imperative, it just strengthens your application and makes you more competitive when you go to those agencies for the money, if you can say that at the least you're providing salary while they're training. Other expenses that you could expect, or investments that you would expect to have in the grant process, is the contact, your HR contact that's going to work with the college. That person needs to be able to have access to employment records and so forth, and scheduling to the employees for the classes, because it is a commitment that when you make that investment, there's not anyone that I've heard of that gets a blank check for training. Most every organization across the country that gives money, they want to know what the money's going for. So those have to be outlined in advance, and the business is prepared to seat those students when the time comes. It starts with a needs assessment, which oftentimes the economic development partners and the workforce board come with the college to help in those needs assessments. Especially in the lead, if you know of a company that's going to be expanding their production line, or opening up a second shift at the, for the call centers, and making different types of process improvements, then it's important to contact your continuing education division at your college and find out how, what can we do about that. If they're able to, if training is involved, then that's something you certainly want to work on. I'd like to lift up an example here, although it's not a call center, but sometimes even with bringing in a production line, there's certain qualifications that the employees that are on staff need to consider, as well as those that are being brought in or hired. And one example I'd share with you is a production line that was actually moving from one part of the country to a local plant. They had to go through some welding certifications. They had to be able to do some aluminum welding that was not presently being done at the facility. And so the community college was able to develop a welding certification exam, run those people through it, and that was used for promotion, for job placement for those that are currently in there, and then also as a hiring opportunity. So that's just part of one of the things that you can do. I'm also familiar with a program that was developed for customer service, and this one, the community college worked in that more of an open enrollment environment, helping prepare the workforce for the oncoming new partner. And those programs were developed in a certification so that the students could sign up on their own, and oftentimes the workforce board would pay for them through WIA dollars, and they would take the programs and then come out of that with a certification and really be moved to the top of the list for when the employment opportunities arose from the new company coming in. How do you collaborate and encourage collaboration among the EDs, the companies, and the college? Well, it's easy to say that we can look to equipment as one of those areas. If there's certain software programs that the employees are going to need to learn, that's always important to be able to access that, whether it's available at the college or there's some facility there that the company would have maybe a little more oversight to. That's always good. Equipment can be loaned. And then also there's an opportunity for colleges to be able to access equipment through the company's vendors, and whether it's donated and placed at the college so that the workforce can be further developed after the initial training event occurs. That's incredibly important and very valuable to both your taxpayers that are supporting that college and the growth of your workforce. The company subject matter experts are wonderful because they can help design those customized training programs and also serve in an advisory capacity to the college as time goes on. Each grant has its own process, and some of the things that you need to consider as you look to help a company, a new organization, apply for those grants with a college is don't wait too long to get started. It's never too soon to start. Most of the money that that the states have comes through the colleges, and this is something that's really, unless you familiarize yourself with it, you may not even have realized that. There are a lot of great economic development dollars out there that can come through the community college. And the college has experience in preparing those grants. So they know how to work through the system, and they have many times years of experience with successful grant applications. So you want to be sure to turn to them. And, you know, one of the things that we look at is, well, what if your college has not, that you're not familiar at all with your college ever getting one of these grants? Then another way you can partner with them is to make sure that they have the funds to send someone to the workshops. Community colleges across the country are seeing budget cuts, and oftentimes travel is one of the first places that the budget is reduced. And so as an economic development partner, if you're able to fund a trip for the staff to go to workshops, work with those agencies, and learn a little bit more about how to bring that money to your community, it's an excellent investment. The awards come and the training begins. And so, you know, whether it's soft skills, hard skills, or customer service, whatever it may be, it's always an exciting time when you bring that money in, and your partners are going to be so thrilled. The grant process usually takes longer than what you'd ever imagine, and you can't get discouraged. You just stay with it. But the history of successful grants helps to move things along. You want to establish some measures of success for the training that goes on, and I really encourage you as economic development partners to get involved in that on the front end when you're talking to your community college training experts and the company, because what you want to do afterwards is to make sure that you have those metrics down so that you can tell the story later to other companies. It's one thing to say we did great things, but to be able to show the progress that was made, what was expected, and the results, then the accountability really lends credibility to what you've done. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Patty.
You're welcome.
And now we're going to go ahead.
That's okay. I seem to have missed a slide, but just in summary, turn to your community college and don't forget them, utilize them, and truly they are one of your best kept secrets, and they can help to recruit high quality companies to your area.
Okay, great. Thank you. And now we're turning to the question and answer session of this webinar. Again, you can submit your questions through the right-hand panel on your screen, and we have a few questions that have come in since. So the first one was we'll just go straight with Patty. Was there a specific class that the center offered that was particularly helpful in supporting the cluster, the outsourcing cluster that's there in North Texas?
What we have, I'm not sure. There's so many classes. It's hard to say there's one specific one, but it is a lot of the call centers have an incredible training program within their own organization. So what they are often looking for are the computer skills, the customer service, and that sort of thing. So those are areas where, if you're looking at the back office call center type operations, you can help prepare the workforce in those areas. Other ones, for the more technical operations that you're recruiting, we have industrial maintenance technology and those sorts of things where you can help develop the workforce and gaining some basic skills in the hydraulics, electricity, programmable logic controllers, and so forth, that are incredibly helpful. In fact, Tony Kaai and the Denison Area Manufacturing Association has been successful in gaining some scholarships for continuing education programs there, and he might want to elaborate a little bit more on that, but it's quite unique for continuing ed to get scholarships for high school students to be able to come and take certificate programs that are only continuing ed. I hope that's helpful.
Okay. There was a question here specifically for Doug on this. The question was around the B&I loans, as to whether or not those were available for services companies, or were those more for the agricultural companies or product-based companies?
Yeah, thank you for the question. No, certainly. They are available for essentially any for-profit entity in a rural area. Yeah, we've certainly financed a service sector, including call centers, and it's a particular focus that we have here at the department, and related to an effort to make sure that rural communities are taking advantage of new infrastructure, new broadband infrastructure, and we realize and have had a number of initiatives and efforts to make sure that the private sector understands that we have financing available to utilize, that new broadband infrastructure. And service sector jobs, I think, are perhaps the best example. And I just want to mention and really appreciated both of the presentations. On the community college front, USDA Rural Development is engaging in a much more deliberate manner these days, recognizing all of the value that community colleges bring to rural places, as outlined by Patty. And in fact, just last week I was in Miami at the Workforce Development Conference held by the American Community Colleges, and that's my answer. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Doug. The next question is, I guess, is for anyone. It's about sort of, I guess it's an open-ended question, is about what the labor markets are like in rural regions. The questioner asked about that he's heard some great things about, very positive things about the retention, the dedication, and low turnover rates of the labor market, but has sometimes heard that the softer skills can be a challenge that needs to be addressed. I'll throw it open to anyone of our panelists.
I'll take a shot at that. We have, like I said, we have two companies that have been in our market for about 30 years. That's Cigna and Trailblazer. And when we're recruiting another company into this area, they always want to talk to the existing companies about the labor force. And Dr. Poole's been involved in those meetings with me. But what our employers say is that because of being in a rural area like Denison, those workers that you'll have minimal turnover for a couple of reasons. One, if the company is a good company and they take care of their employees, you know, it's a good job, they're going to stay there. Secondly, when you get into rural areas, there's not a job jumping like you have in metro areas, so the turnover rate is extremely low. And in this case, Trailblazer, for example, has an operation here, and they also have an operation in Dallas. And to hear the discussion about the different turnover rates and dedication to the job is quite significant, beneficial in Denison as opposed to being in a metro area, and I think that's probably common sense. The soft skill debate, I mean, we're having soft skill deficiencies across the board, not just for back office and call centers, but also in manufacturing. And those are things that the college and our high school, we're all working on those together, but it's a national, I think a national trend with the new, I guess the new thinking of the emerging workforce that we're all dealing with, and it's a challenge, but it's not unique to rural. I think it's across the board.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Patty?
And I would agree with that. In the work I do across the country, that there is not there doesn't seem to be a delineation between those from rural areas and those from the city on soft skills and lack thereof. It's a problem across the board, and it's not just young people either. It's it's some of the older workers as well. So we have a challenge there.
And I would just make one comment that, and we've for purposes of trying to simplify the discussion, we talk about rural places in rural America as sort of a just one type of demographic, but fact of the matter is it's very diverse. And in some places, I think the conditions that Matthew or that the questioner provided is very accurate, and in other places that's not necessarily the case. It's real localized in terms of the skill sets, the unemployment rate, even the how retention rate, depending on how close they are to a metro region, or the trajectory of the economy. So I mean, I generally agree with with sort of the assumptions of the questioner, but just want to make that point that you really need to look at the conditions of your local area, because rural is such a diverse place here in the United States.
Great, thank you, Doug. Next question is for Doug. Have all the available RED LG funds been awarded in recent years? Does USDA Rural Development anticipate the max loan amount for the RED-LG to be raised in the future?
That is the program. The grant side of it is certainly oversubscribed every year, and in the last few years, the grant side of most of our programs, as opposed to the direct or guaranteed loan side, the grant side has been shrinking, just simply because of the fiscal constraints that the federal government finds itself in, as well as certainly many other components of the economy. I think that in terms of the resources going forward, we will, the President will release a budget next Monday, which actually I'm not privy to talk about particular numbers, but I can say that USDA will certainly continue to have very substantial resources to assist and support businesses in, whether it be in service sector work or manufacturing or otherwise, and the what we call the Red Leg program is certainly continue to be an important component of that.
Okay, thank you. For Tony, what programs have you used to fund local purchases of buildings and or properties through the Denison Development Alliance?
Well, we actually have, we're very fortunate, we have two funds that we use. One, we have a private nonprofit organization called the Denison Development Alliance, and we also have the other organization that I'm the president of, that's the Denison Development Alliance. The nonprofit is funded through many, many years of buying and selling and developing real estate. The public entity, the Denison Development Alliance, is funded by a half-cent sales tax. We can buy facilities from either one of those entities. So we've done that. The call center is owned by the Industrial Foundation, the Walmart building that we talked about, that 85,000 square foot building. And then the public entity, the Denison Development Alliance, we did a build-to-suit for a manufacturing company of, I think it's about $4.5 million, 100,000 square foot manufacturing facility. So we're very fortunate in Denison and in a lot of Texas and some other states. We have the funds, and we're allowed by law to use those funds to develop, own, operate real estate.
And those funds come through a dedicated sales tax revenue that comes to you, right?
That's one of the sources. The other is just from private investments that the foundation's made over the years.
Okay. Thank you. And then the final question is also for you, Tony. And this one is a little bit broad, but you talked about the cluster of call centers or outsourcing centers that you have there in North Texas. The question is, what's your secret sauce? Why is the cluster formed in that region?
Well, I think a couple of things. One is it's a really good place as far as location. We're only about 40 miles from the Metroplex, so we're a suburban ring, if you will, but we're still rural. We are on Lake Texoma, which is a great quality of life amenity for this area. We're about the right size as far as a region. Again, the two cities together, 120,000 people. It just had a long history of extremely successful in not only manufacturing jobs, but in these service center jobs. I don't know if there's a secret, but I know our specific secret is what I talked about in the presentation, and that's knowing your prospect, knowing what they want, and being able to respond in a very, very quick manner and make it a good deal for both parties. If you can do that, you're going to have success.
Great, thank you. So that concludes our webinar for today. I'd like to remind folks the webinar was recorded, and you will receive an email from us providing you with a link to it. We'd like to thank our speakers for providing very insightful presentations. We'd also like to thank the USDA Rural Development Office for sponsoring this webinar event, and for you, the audience, for taking your time to join us. We look forward to hosting you on our next webinar in March. We will be sending around an email on that. Thank you again for your time.